The rain hit first. Hard, cold sheets washing the world away. I pulled my coat tighter, running the last few steps. Home. Safety. But the key didn't turn. It just rattled. Useless. My hand trembled, rain plastering my hair to my face. I tried again. Pushed. Pulled. Nothing. Then the click. Loud, definitive, echoing in the sudden quiet between thunderclaps. It wasn't broken. It was locked. From the inside, against me. The shock was a physical blow, stealing my breath more effectively than the downpour. How? Why? It was impossible. My knees felt weak. Betrayal tasted like dust in my mouth, though all I swallowed was rain. This wasn't just a door. This was everything. Closing. If you've ever felt like the people you loved the most hurt you the deepest, stay with me. This story might be yours too. And if this touches your heart, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. The water streamed down my face, blurring the familiar porch into a watercolor mess. The sound of the lock clicking had always meant welcome, safety. My son, when he was just learning to walk, used to giggle and hold onto the big brass knob, pretending to lock out the monsters. I can still hear that small, sweet sound in my head, click, click, followed by his infectious laughter. Now that sound was a weapon. It sliced through the storm, a sharp, clean cut. The rain was relentless, soaking through my clothes in seconds, chilling me to the bone. It wasn't just the cold, wet fabric clinging to my skin. It was a sudden internal freeze. A realization that this moment, this physical barrier, was merely the surface of something much deeper, much colder, that had been building unseen. The shock of being locked out was profound, a primal rejection. But beneath that immediate hurt was a sudden sharp ache, a recognition of an older, unhealed wound that this simple click had ripped wide open. The pain wasn't just about this night, this rain, this door. It was about a truth I hadn't dared to name until now. A truth that the storm had finally exposed. I stood there, shivering, the porch light a hazy halo in the deluge, and felt the crushing weight of being utterly alone, in the face of a reality I couldn't comprehend. The challenge wasn't finding shelter. It was facing the fact that the shelter I thought was mine was gone. And if this touches your heart, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It was the year she turned 17. The air in her bedroom had felt thick, like something you could choke on. Not just the usual teenager-scented blend of cheap perfume and clothes left too long in the hamper, but something heavier, charged with unspoken accusation. I remember standing in the doorway, the pale afternoon light filtering through the blinds, striping the floor like bars. My daughter sat hunched on her bed, her back a rigid line, staring out the window at nothing I could see. We hadn't screamed. Not this time. Sometimes the silence was louder, sharper than any shout. It was the kind of silence that built walls, brick by careful brick, between two people who used to know the contours of each other's breath. I had asked her something simple, mundane, about her plans for that evening. A question that should have been answered with a shrug and a mumbled, "going out." Instead, I got that back, that silent, stony back. The silence stretched, taut and brittle. I could hear the clock ticking somewhere downstairs, the faraway hum of traffic outside. My hands felt cold, clammy at my sides. My chest tightened. I wanted to reach out, to touch her shoulder, maybe smooth a stray hair from her face. But the space between us felt vast, an ocean. Any move felt dangerous, like shattering fragile ice. What she didn't know, couldn't have known, was the tremor in my own hands wasn't just frustration. It was fear. Fear for her, yes, always that low hum of maternal worry. But deeper, darker, it was fear of myself. Fear that I was failing, that every word I chose or didn't choose was wrong. Fear that the distance between us wasn't just a phase, but a permanent drift. Fear that this beautiful, complicated person I had raised was slipping away into a world I couldn't follow, marked by a language I no longer understood. I remember the way the dust motes danced in the light beams, oblivious to the emotional storm brewing just inches away. Her stillness was a judgment. My own stillness was paralysis. I wanted to tell her everything, how my own teenage years had been a minefield, how I just wanted to protect her from the same mistakes, how terrified I was of her getting hurt, of her making choices she'd regret. But the words felt lodged in my throat, choked by that fear, twisted by my own pride. So I said nothing. I just stood there, absorbing the chill that radiated from her, letting the silence deepen the canyon that had opened between us. It was a moment that seemed small in the grand scheme of things, just a mother and daughter in a quiet room. But it echoed. It echoed for years, a cold note in the symphony of our relationship, a reminder of the things left unsaid, the fears left buried, and the distance that began with a silent back and a locked-down heart. That moment solidified the rift, making the air around us permanently cooler, even on the warmest days. The rain fell harder now, not a gentle shower any longer, but thick, cold needles against my skin and the canvas roof of the old porch swing. I pulled my coat tighter, useless against the chill that had seeped deep into the bone. My hands were numb, clumsy things that felt alien at the ends of my wrists. I could feel the dampness clinging to my hair, running in thin rivulets down my neck. It wasn't just the cold rain on the outside. It was a coldness that seemed to originate from somewhere much deeper within, mirroring the world outside. The porch light cast a hazy yellow glow through the downpour, illuminating the wall of water that separated me from the house, from them. I stared at the front door, that solid barrier of wood and paint. It wasn't locked, I knew. I could have turned the handle, stepped inside, shaken off the water, but something held me back. The rain wasn't just a physical boundary, it felt like a visible manifestation of the distance that had grown between us. Each drop was a quiet acknowledgement of the unspoken words, the unheard fears, the moments of connection that had simply stopped. The longer I stood there, the colder and wetter I became, the more profound the realization became. This wasn't just about waiting out a storm. This was about being on the outside, looking in at a life that once felt entirely mine and now felt like a photograph behind a rain-streaked window. It was a sudden, sharp pain, like breathing in ice. The physical discomfort was a distraction, a shield against the terrifying truth that emerged from the quiet hum of the rain. This distance, this separation that felt so tangible out here in the storm, wasn't a temporary state, a passing cloud. What if this was it? What if the emotional chasm that separated us now was already too wide to cross? The fear tightened its grip, cold and persistent as the rain. It was the untold truth I hadn't allowed myself to voice until that moment, standing alone on the porch. The quiet, devastating fear that this separation wasn't just happening. It might already be permanent, that I might never truly be inside again. The air in her room felt thick, heavy with unspoken words and teenage resentment. I remember the posters on the wall, the tangled earphones on her desk, the way she'd hunch over her phone like it held the secrets of the universe, secrets she was determined to keep from me. This was a new landscape, one where my compass points seemed to spin wildly off course. She was pulling away, not just physically, but in every way that mattered. My daughter, the one who used to crawl into my lap for stories, now answered in shrugs and monosyllables. Getting her to talk felt like trying to catch smoke. It slipped through my fingers no matter how gently I reached out. There was this one evening, etched into my memory like a scar. I just wanted to know about her day, maybe ask about a friend, simple things. But the question landed like an accusation. Her eyes, once so bright and open to me, were narrowed, defensive. She snapped, sharp and sudden, about how I never trusted her, how I was always in her business. Every word felt like a tiny shard of glass. She wanted space, she said, her voice vibrating with frustration. She wasn't a little kid anymore. It was true, of course. She wasn't. She was shedding her childhood skin, pushing hard against the boundaries I'd set, boundaries built from my fierce, protective love. But her need for independence felt like a rejection, a tearing away. My concerns for her safety, for her choices, clashed head-on with her desperate need to make her own way, to stumble and learn without my shadow looming. I saw the world outside, full of edges and pitfalls, and all I wanted was to wrap her in cotton wool. She saw my worry as control, my questions as doubt. What she couldn't know, what I couldn't tell her then, was that while I was trying to navigate the choppy waters of her adolescence, my own world was shaking. There was a quiet storm raging within me, a fear about money that kept me awake at night, a health scare I was facing alone, the steady erosion of a relationship I thought was solid. I was juggling so many fragile things, trying desperately to keep them from crashing down. Her growing pains were loud and visible, a hurricane in our house. My struggles were silent, hidden deep inside, adding an unbearable weight to every difficult conversation, every slammed door, every look of disdain she cast my way. I felt like I was drowning, trying to keep my head above water for both of us, while she was pushing me away, thinking I was the one pulling her down. The irony was a bitter taste I swallowed daily. There was a time, just a few years into becoming a mother, when the world seemed to shrink to the size of our tiny apartment, and even that felt too vast for the weight I was carrying. It wasn't just the usual struggles of raising young children. This was something heavier, a constant dull ache that settled deep in my chest. There were bills I couldn't pay, not just rent, but things that felt essential for us to survive. It felt like I was treading water in a cold, dark ocean, the waves constantly threatening to pull me under. I remember one particular afternoon. My son was napping. My daughter was playing quietly on the floor with some blocks. The only sound, the soft click-clack of plastic. The air felt thick and stagnant, smelling faintly of last night's dinner and stale desperation. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at a pile of envelopes, the edges sharp against the worn wood. Each one felt like a stone dropped onto my shoulders. I wanted to scream, to weep. But a strange numbness had settled over me. I felt utterly, completely alone. The silence in the apartment wasn't peaceful. It was the sound of my own isolation echoing back at me. My fingers traced the outlines of the letters, smooth yet threatening. It was my daughter's small voice that broke through. "Mama, you look sad." She stood beside my chair, her little hand reaching up, her touch feather-light on my arm. I looked at her face, so open, so full of concern, and the numbness shattered. I saw my own fear reflected in the slight worry on her brow. That heavy burden, the one I thought I was carrying just for myself, was casting a shadow over their light. My inability to manage, my constant tension, my distracted sadness, it was impacting them. That was the turning point. The realization that my struggle wasn't just mine anymore. It was seeping into the very foundation of their childhood. What made it feel even heavier, what made the isolation so profound, was the specific reason I couldn't truly share the depth of it. There was a secret tangled up in the hardship, a promise I had made, or a truth I was protecting that wasn't mine to tell. It involved someone outside our immediate family, someone who would have been deeply hurt, perhaps even ruined, if my struggle became public knowledge, even within my own circle. So I built walls. I smiled when my parents called. I brushed off questions from friends. I pretended everything was manageable. That untold truth, that specific secret reason I couldn't fully explain my difficulties, was the lock on the box where I kept all my pain, making the weight I carried feel doubly heavy and isolating. My hands were shaking just slightly as I held the photograph. It was tucked into the corner of a mirror, slightly askew, the glass yellowed with time. My son and my daughter, maybe 3 and 5, perched on that old porch swing, giggling. His missing front tooth, her scraped knee just visible beneath her sock. The sun back then felt brighter, tasted sweeter on the air. It wasn't a grand portrait, just a snapshot, taken quickly, probably with my phone. But I remembered the way the light caught their hair, the sheer, unadulterated joy that filled the air that afternoon. The scent of cut grass and my daughter's strawberry-scented sunscreen. I remembered the weight of my son in my lap just moments before, his small hand sticky with juice. Choosing to leave it was the hardest thing. Every instinct screamed, take everything. Pack the memories, hold onto the proof that happiness had lived here. But as I ran my thumb over the faded image, I knew. I couldn't take this one. It wasn't just a photo. It was a tether. A quiet, fragile plea left behind. I walked over to the small shelf where I used to keep their bedtime stories. The wood felt cool and dusty under my fingertips. Carefully, deliberately, I placed the photo there, propped against a stack of worn fairy tales. Visible, yes, but not shouting. Just waiting. The challenge wasn't the physical act. It was the admission woven into it. The desperation that hoped this small, silent gesture might speak volumes. Remember this. Remember us. It was the frail, flickering hope that seeing their happy faces, frozen in a moment of innocent light, might stir something. A memory of the life we built, the love that had filled these rooms before the quiet turned into shouting and the light dimmed, and underneath the hope, a deep, icy fear. Fear that it wouldn't matter, that it would be ignored or worse, tossed aside without a second glance. Fear that this quiet act of leaving a piece of my heart behind was nothing more than a futile, pathetic gesture in the face of something already broken beyond repair. The silence in the house pressed in, heavy and knowing, as I turned away from the shelf, leaving the giggling ghosts of my children behind. The house smelled not of sunscreen or grass anymore, but of stale air and endings. It felt like a physical blow sometimes, the silence between us. Like standing on one side of a vast cold room and seeing her, my daughter, on the other. A stranger. Was this the girl whose small hand used to feel so warm and secure in mine? The girl whose laughter could chase away any shadow? The contrast. It was a constant ache. There was one afternoon, years ago, that comes back to me with painful clarity. She was maybe 4, maybe 5. We were in the backyard, under the old oak tree. The sun dappled through the leaves, casting dancing shadows on the grass. I remember the smell of the freshly cut lawn, a sweet, green scent, mixed with the faint perfume of the honeysuckle vine creeping up the fence. We were blowing bubbles, simple, childish things. Her tiny face was upturned, eyes wide with wonder as a bubble drifted higher and higher, shimmering with impossible colors, blues, greens, purples reflecting the bright sky. I blew another, then another, watching her chase them, her short legs pumping, her arms outstretched. She'd catch one, laughing as it popped against her fingers, leaving just a faint, wet trace. Her laugh, it wasn't the controlled, polite sound she makes now. It was pure, unrestrained joy, a bell-like cascade of sound that filled the air, light and free. She tripped once, a small stumble, and I knelt instantly. She didn't cry, just looked up at me, her bottom lip trembling for a second, then burst into giggles again, pointing at the rogue bubble that had landed on my nose. I remember wiping it away, her hair brushing my cheek, smelling faintly of sunshine and the children's shampoo we used. In that moment, kneeling there with her, the world outside our little bubble felt distant, unimportant. It was just her, me, the sun, and the endless, shimmering orbs floating on the breeze. A moment of perfect, uncomplicated connection. Pure love, given and received without question, without condition. If I could go back to that moment, kneel there under the oak tree, with the scent of grass and honeysuckle thick in the air, and whisper something to my past self, what would it be? What was the untold truth I needed to know? Maybe just cherish this feeling, engrave it into your soul. The world will try to chip away at it. Circumstances will build walls, and she will change. And knowing how much this hurts now, how much you long for that simple touch, that easy laugh, maybe, just maybe, knowing the potential for this much distance could have made you fight harder to stay close. Maybe it could have guided your words, softened your reactions, shown you where the silent cracks were starting even then. I wish I had known how precious, how fragile that echo of childhood would become. I remember calling, my thumb hovering over her name in my contacts list. It felt heavy, that simple action. I needed to ask her something small, trivial really, but it was more about just hearing her voice. The phone rang, once, twice, then switched to voicemail. Her recorded voice was clipped, efficient, no warmth. I left a brief message, trying to sound casual, like it didn't matter. But it did. Every unanswered call felt like another pebble dropped into the vast, quiet chasm that had opened between us. The silence on the other end wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the echo of all the things unsaid, the growing distance made audible. Later that week, I saw her at a family gathering. The air crackled with unspoken things whenever we were near each other. I noticed a small tear in the hem of her favorite skirt, the one she'd worn since she was a teenager. It seemed like an opening, a simple, practical way to bridge the gap. I brought a small sewing kit from my bag, the kind with tiny thread spools and a needle tucked in a plastic case. "Let me just fix that for you. Quick stitch," I offered, holding it out with a small, hopeful smile. It was a gesture rooted in years of fixing scraped knees and loose buttons, a language of care I thought she understood. But she just looked at the kit, then at me, her eyes distant, almost wary. "It's fine," she said, her voice cool, shutting down the possibility instantly. The kit felt heavy in my hand, suddenly ridiculous. The small practical offer was met with a wall, misinterpreted perhaps as interference or worse, pity. It wasn't just the failed attempt. It was the understanding that even the most basic expressions of maternal care were now alien, unwanted. The sting wasn't just rejection. It was the realization that the way I knew how to love her, the practical, quiet ways, no longer reached her. And I stood there, kit in hand, my throat tight, unable to articulate the simple, vulnerable truth that I just wanted to be needed, even for something as small as a single stitch. The insecurity whispered that trying harder, explaining myself, would only make it worse, push her further away. So I just nodded, put the kit away, and swallowed the lump in my throat. And then came the words. Not loud, not screamed, but sharp, like slivers of glass buried under smooth sand. We were standing in the kitchen, the air thick and still, pregnant with unspoken resentments that had finally boiled over. It wasn't even a major conflict, just another small misunderstanding about future plans, about expectations I didn't even know she thought I had. But in that moment, fueled by months of growing distance, she looked at me, her eyes cold and unfamiliar, and she said it. "You don't even see," she whispered, the sound more devastating than a shout. "You just see who you want me to be. You never cared about who I actually am." It felt like a physical blow, The clatter of the pots hanging on the rack seemed to amplify the silence that followed her accusation. That was the turning point. Hearing those words, that specific phrase, felt like being stripped bare and found wanting in the most fundamental way. I saw myself through her eyes in that instant, a caricature of control, blind to her true self. It wasn't just a disagreement anymore. It was a judgment on my love, on my very nature as her mother. My throat tightened, a hot, stinging sensation that made speaking impossible. What could I say? That everything I had ever done, every choice I'd pushed her towards, every boundary I'd set, came from a place of fierce, often clumsy love. That I did see her, but I also saw the potential pitfalls, the same ones I'd stumbled into myself. There was a tangled web of history, of my own fears and hopes projected onto her. Yes, but underneath it all was a bedrock of wanting her safety, her happiness, her future success. It wasn't about control. It was about a terrifying, overwhelming sense of responsibility I'd carried since the moment she was born. But those complex layers, that genuine intention, I couldn't articulate them. The words caught in my chest, a heavy, immovable weight. All she saw was the surface. The actions she perceived as restrictive or dismissive. All I felt was the crushing weight of being utterly misunderstood, misrepresented by the very person I loved most, the one I thought knew my heart better than anyone. Outside, the first heavy drops began to patter against the window pane, mirroring the sudden, unexpected downpour within me. The argument ended not with resolution, but with a choked silence and the sound of rain. And that was the moment the distance became a chasm. My fingers traced the smooth, cool wood of the tiny bird. It fit entirely in my palm, worn soft from years of being held. I felt the slight chip on its wingtip, a familiar imperfection that took me back instantly, back to the sound of their voice, the weight of their hand, placing it gently into mine. It was a simple thing, carved with care but not with professional skill. A little piece of ordinary wood, shaped and smoothed. But it was never just wood. It held the weight of a promise, whispered almost casually, a promise about forever, about safety, about a future I desperately needed to believe in. The untold truth wasn't in the carving itself, but in the silence that fell after the words were spoken, after the little bird was given. It was the silence where doubt should have been, where questions should have been asked but weren't. It was the space filled instead by a fragile, desperate hope. Leaving this, leaving them, wasn't just about packing belongings. It was about deciding which pieces of my history, which silent burdens, which unfulfilled hopes I could entrust to these inanimate objects. Could this little bird, sitting in a box, truly hold the echo of that promise? Could the fading photograph of a shared smile somehow contain the memory of the tears shed hours later? It felt like a monumental leap of faith, a terrifying gamble, placing the most vulnerable parts of myself, the shattered trust, the lingering affection, the profound disappointment, into the care of objects. Trusting that they wouldn't forget, wouldn't diminish, wouldn't let the history fade entirely. It was the only way I knew to carry forward the parts of me that couldn't speak, the messages that were never heard. These weren't just objects. They were silent witnesses, fragile keepers of my untold truth. And so I began. Not with a plan, really, but with an ache. A need to make sense of the quiet chaos that had settled in my chest. I found an old box of stationery, the kind with faint lines and a watermark I could barely see, and a pen that scratched just right against the paper. It felt like confession, like digging into earth long settled. Late nights became my sanctuary. The house was asleep. Only the hum of the refrigerator and the distant bark of a dog disturbing the silence. I'd brew tea, strong, just like my mother used to make, the smell of it thick and comforting, and sit at the kitchen table, the lamplight casting long shadows. Putting the words down was harder than lifting stones. Each sentence felt like a weight, connected to a memory, a feeling I'd carefully packed away. My fingers would sometimes cramp, the pen pressing so hard it tore the paper. I'd crumple those failures, the sound a sharp crack in the stillness, adding them to a growing pile in the corner. It wasn't just recounting facts, it was reliving the taste of betrayal. The cold shock of realizing love wasn't a shield. I'd start writing about one thing, say a sunny afternoon at the park, and suddenly the taste of dust from a forgotten moment would fill my mouth, and my hand would freeze. The turning point wasn't a single crash, but a slow, creeping tide. It was the realization that I couldn't just write about others. I had to write about myself in relation to them. I had to face the parts I played, the choices I made, the pain I carried that had nothing to do with anyone else's actions. I remember one night writing about the way laughter used to echo in our home, and instead of smiling at the memory, a sob caught in my throat. It wasn't sadness for the past. It was the raw, burning shame of knowing I had let that echo fade, piece by agonizing piece. That I had allowed silence to become a comfortable habit, mistaking it for peace. The untold truth wasn't just what happened to me. It was the stark, blinding lesson that my own silence had been complicity. That my fear of confrontation, my desperate need to keep the surface smooth, had allowed the rot underneath to spread. The item I left behind wasn't a ledger of grievances. It was the map of my own broken path, marked with the places where I stumbled, where I hid, and where, finally, I found the courage to name the pain that had motivated every carefully constructed wall around my heart. Writing it wasn't about blame. It was about finally seeing the truth, sharp and clean, like broken glass. The rain wasn't just falling anymore. It was coming down with purpose, hard little needles hitting the pavement, splashing up around my feet. It felt cold, but somehow clean, washing over everything outside. While I waited, shivering slightly despite my coat, the cold wasn't just external. It was inside too, the chill that had nothing to do with the weather. I stood there, the sound of the downpour filling the silence between us, and the reflection started. Not just about this moment, but about all the moments that led us here. I thought about the times I was impatient, the times I was tired, the times I didn't listen hard enough. My perceived failures piled up, heavy as the gray clouds above. Was I too strict? Too lenient? Did I push too hard or not push enough? Each splash of rain felt like another missed step, Another wrong turn I'd taken. It wasn't just the small things, though. There was something larger. A shadow I'd carried for years. An untold truth that had quietly eroded something vital. It was a decision, or maybe more accurately, a lack of one. A moment where I chose silence over honesty, where I prioritized comfort, my own or someone else's, over facing a difficult truth with my son. It wasn't malicious, not intended to wound, but it set things on a different path. It built a tiny, invisible wall between us, brick by painstaking brick, every single day since. That long-held regret, the memory of that specific moment, hit me with the force of the rain now. I could almost smell the air of that day, feel the tension I ignored, hear the words I swallowed instead of saying. It was a specific conversation I avoided, a necessary intervention I postponed indefinitely, telling myself it wasn't the right time, that he was too young, that it would just cause more pain. But in avoiding that temporary pain, I allowed a deeper, chronic ache to set in, one that has defined our distance. It impacted our relationship in ways I'm only now truly understanding. Watching him choose distance over closeness. That choice, that singular moment of cowardice masked as caution, felt like the original sin in the story of our drifting apart. And standing here in the rain, waiting, I knew I had to face the truth of it myself before I could ever hope to explain it to him. My mother wasn't one for grand declarations or effusive praise. Her love felt quiet, like a warm blanket you didn't notice until you were cold without it. I remember sitting beside her on the floral sofa, the air thick with the smell of old paperbacks and the faint, sweet scent of her perfume. Something powdery and forgotten. I was maybe 10, trying to tell her about a small triumph at school, something I was so proud of. She was leafing through a magazine, her fingers tracing the glossy pages. She nodded, a hum deep in her throat, but her eyes stayed on the page. I waited, a knot tightening in my stomach, for a smile, a word, anything more. It never came. The silence stretched, filled only by the gentle rustle of the magazine and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. It felt like a physical ache, that silence, that lack of focused attention. It wasn't harshness, not exactly, but a kind of emotional distance that left me feeling adrift, small and invisible. Years later, holding my own daughter's hand, watching her beam about a drawing she'd made, I felt a sudden, sharp tremor. It was the fear, cold and immediate, that I might make her feel that way. I vowed I would be different. I would be present. I would listen. I would see her. This became my mission, a fierce, protective instinct born from that quiet ache. I poured myself into her life, every detail, every feeling. I wanted to fix the past, to give her the connection I felt I'd missed. But the untold truth, the painful twist, was that in my desperate effort not to repeat my mother's perceived emotional distance, I swung too far. My presence became overwhelming. My anxiety about not making her feel invisible made me hover, question, analyze every tiny shift in her mood. The need for her to feel seen and heard turned into a need for me to be seen and needed by her, a subtle, suffocating pressure. The challenges weren't distance anymore. but a different kind of struggle. My daughter needed space, room to breathe and explore independence, and my inability to step back, driven by my own history, created a new, unexpected tension between us. I wasn't my mother, but the ghost of her presence, or lack thereof, still shaped the challenges I faced. I had pictured it 1,000 times, not exactly how, but the moment itself. A quiet afternoon, perhaps. The house silent save for the gentle tick of the old grandfather clock in the hall. She'd be exploring, maybe looking for something simple, an old photo album, a forgotten book. And then her hand would brush against something unexpected, tucked away, deliberately hidden, yet always meant to be found. It wasn't just a collection of things. It was a piece of me I had kept locked away, layered with dust and silence. My truest thoughts, my most fragile feelings, laid bare not on paper or in spoken words, but through objects, colors, textures, a map of my internal landscape. The risk was immense. What if she saw it and didn't understand? What if the vulnerability I exposed looked like weakness, or worse, deception? My stomach would knot whenever I thought about her fingers closing around it. Would there be surprise first, then curiosity? I imagined the faint scent of aged paper, perhaps a hint of dried flowers I pressed years ago, rising from the box. The gentle weight in her hands. I saw her sitting on the floor, sunlight slanting through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing around her as she opened it. The soft rustle of fabric, the cool touch of metal, the dull gleam of a polished stone. Each item a word I couldn't speak, a tear I wouldn't shed in front of her. The silence in my imagined scene was deafening. Her face, so like my own, would be a canvas I couldn't read from this distance. Would her brow furrow in confusion? Would a flicker of recognition cross her eyes? This untold truth wasn't a secret in the sense of wrongdoing, but a revelation of my own deep struggles, my anxieties, the parts of me I had carefully concealed to appear strong, capable, a mother who had it all together. Exposing this felt like standing naked in a storm, waiting for the lightning strike of her judgment. Would she pull away, feeling the weight of my inner chaos? Or would she lean in, finding a new fragile connection? The uncertainty was a constant. Dull ache beneath my ribs. It was the fear that in showing her who I truly was beneath the surface, I might lose her entirely. The vulnerability was terrifying, not for myself, but for how it might shatter the image she held of me, and in doing so, shatter something between us that felt unbreakable. I held my breath, even in the imagining, waiting for the moment her eyes would meet mine across the chasm of my unspoken world. The box was heavier than it looked, cardboard brittle with age, tied with faded ribbon. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of light from the window as I lifted the lid. It smelled faintly of dried flowers and mothballs, the scent of her things, the scent of a life lived quietly, privately. Inside layers of carefully preserved memories, photos I'd never seen, pressed flowers, and then the stack of letters, bound with string, written in her familiar, elegant script that had grown shakier in later years. I kicked one up, the paper thin and fragile against my fingertips. My breath hitched. It wasn't addressed to anyone specific, more like entries, dated like a diary, though not bound. I began to read, slowly at first, the words swimming through a blur of tears. She wrote about a time before me, a time I knew nothing about. Hardship I couldn't fathom, choices made under duress. She detailed the relentless pressure, the constant fear, the weight of responsibilities I never knew existed. There was a specific passage, recounting a decision she had to make, one that felt impossible. The only way, she had written, her ink pressing hard into the page there, was to disappear, to make myself small, to build a wall around my heart and everything I held dear. It felt like burying a part of myself alive, but it was the only grave I could afford that would keep you safe. Safe? I had felt anything but safe in the silence between us. I had felt rejected, unimportant, always outside her deepest self. But reading this, seeing the raw pain in her words, the sheer desperation, it was a physical blow. The untold truth wasn't about something she did to me, but about something she endured for me. Her emotional distance wasn't coldness. It was a scar tissue, built from years of having to be utterly self-reliant, utterly guarded, just to survive a harsh past I never knew existed. The turning point was swift, brutal, and utterly transformative. The resentment I'd carried, the feeling of being deliberately shut out, crumbled into dust, like the paper in my hands. In its place bloomed a profound, aching sorrow for the young woman who wrote these words, trapped and fighting alone, making sacrifices so deep they hollowed her out. I saw her not as the mother who withheld, but as a person broken by life, giving the only protection she felt she could. The silence wasn't neglect. It was the sound of a lock clicking shut on a pain too vast to share. The silence after felt heavier than any noise could have been. It wasn't just an absence of sound, it was a physical pressure in the air, thick with things unsaid, with the raw edge of a revealed hurt. I remember looking at her then, not really seeing her at first, but seeing the way the light seemed to bend around her, different than before, like she was suddenly existing on another plane, one I hadn't known she inhabited. There was a subtle shift in the very atmosphere of the room, a quiet sorrow settling like dust motes in a sunbeam. Her shoulders were slightly slumped, her gaze distant, fixed on something I couldn't see. The vibrant energy I was so used to, even in her anger, had simply drained away, leaving behind something brittle and fragile. It was like looking at a reflection in cracked glass. The image was still there, but distorted, broken in places. My own chest felt tight, a familiar knot of pain twisting deeper. What words could possibly bridge this chasm that had just opened between us? How do you take the first steps toward understanding when the ground beneath you feels like it's crumbling? The challenge was immense, daunting. Every instinct screamed to reach out, to explain, to fix. But another, quieter voice warned caution, whispered that the wrong move now could shatter everything irrevocably. I just stood there, rooted to the spot, watching my daughter carry this new, heavy knowledge. And then Amidst the silence and the swirling dust motes of grief, it happened. Her eyes lifted, slow and weary, and met mine. In that brief, suspended moment, there were no words spoken. There was no grand gesture of reconciliation. But there was a flicker, a shared recognition of the pain that pulsed between us. Not just her pain from the discovery, but mine too, the old buried ache that had somehow led us here. It wasn't an apology, not from either of us. It was something far more profound and fragile. It was a silent acknowledgement of the hurt, a moment of raw, untranslated empathy that transcended the need for language. In her eyes, I saw not just the hurt, but a glint of understanding that my actions, however misguided, had come from a place she was beginning, perhaps unwillingly, to grasp. And in mine, I hoped she saw the regret that words felt too small to contain. It was the untold truth hanging in the air. We were both wounded, and perhaps, just perhaps, we might find a way through this together, one silent, hesitant breath at a time. Looking back from here now, it feels almost impossible that we were ever so far apart. The storm, the rain lashing against the windows, the quiet unraveling of that hidden story. It was like a brutal cleansing. Before that night, there was this polite distance, a careful ignoring of the cracks that had spread over years. I realize now how much space silence can create between two people who are supposed to be tethered by love. It wasn't a sudden fix. Not a Hollywood ending where tears wash everything away instantly. No, it was harder, messier than that. It was the start of something fragile, something that needed constant attention, like a wilting plant brought back from the brink. That rain-soaked night was the turning point. It wasn't just the secrets unearthed, it was the raw vulnerability forced upon us by the circumstances. There was nowhere to hide anymore, no polite small talk to shield us. We had to speak the difficult words, acknowledge the pain. The misunderstandings that had festered beneath the surface of our relationship. It was agonizing, pulling at threads I thought were permanently knotted. But it was also the first time I felt like we were standing on honest ground, however shaky. It was the beginning of genuine healing, the painstaking work of rebuilding trust, not on a foundation of unspoken truths, but on shared, acknowledged pain. Just last week, we were sitting on the porch swing, watching the fireflies blink in the twilight. She leaned her head on my shoulder, something she hadn't done freely in years. We talked about nothing important. The smell of the damp earth after a recent shower. The sound of crickets starting their evening chorus. It was simple, quiet, but the weight of her head felt like a physical affirmation of the bond slowly mending. I felt the warmth of her presence, smelled the faint scent of jasmine from her hair. It wasn't the forced closeness of duty, but the gentle comfort of chosen connection. That simple moment held more power than any grand gesture could have. The untold truth wasn't just about the specific history that was revealed. It was about the nature of love itself, not as a static, unbreakable thing, but as something dynamic, requiring constant communication, forgiveness, and the courage to face uncomfortable truths. It taught us that hidden histories don't just impact the past. They cast long, cold shadows over the present and future. We learned that communication isn't just talking, it's listening, really listening to the pain and fear beneath the words. It taught us the resilience of the human heart, capable of both immense pain and profound healing, sometimes simultaneously. It taught us that sometimes the hardest storms are necessary to clear the air, to reveal the true landscape beneath the surface, allowing the slow, tender growth of something new. It was the rainstorm, the discovery, and the painful conversations that followed that paved the only road back to each other, not to where we were before, but to a place built on honesty and understanding. And now, the air feels lighter. The silence between us isn't empty anymore. It's often filled with comfortable quiet or gentle laughter. The path wasn't easy, marked by setbacks and moments of doubt, but we found our way. The fear that used to tighten my chest when I thought about our relationship has softened into a quiet hope. Hope for the future, built stone by careful stone, acknowledging the cracks but focusing on the strength of the mortar holding us together now. The journey changed us both, etching lines of experience onto our hearts, but also filling spaces that were once empty with a deeper understanding, a more resilient love. A love that faced the storm and found its way back to the light. Wind down begins, and as the light fades outside and the sounds of the day settle, I find myself sitting here, reflecting on the long road traveled, from the fear that night, the sharp sting of knowing, to the quiet comfort of sharing space now. It wasn't magic, just persistence. Two people, flawed and hurting, deciding that the connection was worth the effort. That vulnerability shared could build something stronger than the walls we'd both erected. There are still shadows sometimes, faint echoes of the past, but they no longer define us. They are just part of the story, part of the tapestry woven with threads of pain, resilience, and ultimately, a quiet, enduring love, a love that knows the full truth and still chooses to stay.